So what does that leave us? If the Abrahamic promise was not fulfilled during the Israelites' pilgrimage in Egypt, then there must be a future fulfillment of this prophecy. Not necessarily future for us in our day and age, but future for the Egyptians during the time of Moses. Now, the only other time that we have in recorded history of the Israelites being taken captive as slaves is during the famous Babylonian captivity. However, everyone knows Scripture made it clear that this captivity lasted only 70 years. According to Scripture and any other extra outside biblical sources, that captivity in Babylon lasted only 70 years. So the captivity in Babylon could not fulfill the promise, could not fulfill the prophecy that Yah made to Abraham. Therefore, we are left with only two possible scenarios. That number one, there remains a future enslavement of the Jewish people which will last 400 years. Number two, there was a past captivity of the children of Israel, of which Scripture nor secular history has recorded as being such. Now, there are many reasons why it is hard to foresee how the Jewish people of today could possibly be taken as slaves and oppressed for 400 years by some foreign nation. Now, here are just a few reasons that I come up with which kind of really bites against these folks, those folks who call themselves Israel or Jews, being taken as slaves for 400 years. Number one, the state of Israel, the country of Israel, is a nuclear power. They have nuclear weapons. So, still makes it kind of highly unlikely there that somebody's going to be able to take them down. All right? Number two, the U.S. is a very close ally who continually supplies the country of Israel with advanced weaponry and financial support. Number three, we have this thing they call the Balfour Declaration, mandate of the League of Nations and UN Declaration of 1947, along with its endorsement of their right to exist within the land. This was made and agreed upon by those nations who are a part of the UN. So there is an international recognition, if you will, of their right to exist as a people within the land. So, number four, the international community would not idly sit by while an entire nation of people are enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. As we've just seen in reason number three, they've already acknowledged that these folks have a right to exist within that land. So it's highly unlikely they're going to flip the script down and say, who cares about them? Let them be slaves for 400 years. Okay? Number five, the economic and military stability of the volatile Middle East would be totally shattered, once again forcing the involvement of the international community in those affairs. So, with those five reasons there, it is highly unlikely that we can foresee, at least not the way things stand today, that the Jewish people, nation of Israel, would be taken as slaves for 400 years by another nation. It's hard to see that. Anything is possible, very hard to see that one. Okay? Now, those are all worldly reasons which forbade the future enslavement of the Jewish people. But I wondered, are there any biblical reasons which prevent the future enslavement of the Jewish people? Because what I just gave you there is all about politics and any reasons which would deny the possibility of a future enslavement by the Jewish people. And believe it or not, yes, there are. Let's look at Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 14 through 15. And it reads, "However, the days are coming, declares Yah, when men will no longer say, as surely as Yah lives, who brought the Israelites up out of Egypt, but they will say, as surely as Yah lives, who brought the Israelites up out of the land of the north, and out of all the countries where he had banished them. For I will restore them to the land I gave their forefathers." So scripture seems to imply here that this second Exodus, as a lot of folks have started to call it, will be so grand that we will no longer speak of the first Exodus from Egypt. Now, you know, as much as we still talk about that one to this day, that will truly be a spectacular event that will cause us to forget the first one and no longer talk about it, and it's going to pale in comparison. Now, history tells us that the Jewish people came into possession of the land by way of a man-fought 6-day war and an eventual UN declaration. There is absolutely nothing special nor spectacular about either of those events. And I ask you, are we not still speaking of and discussing the events that occurred during the first Exodus? Yah just said, when he brings them back into the land, that men will no longer talk about the first Exodus. It will talk about the second one, if you will, the return to the land. But we're still talking about the first. The world barely took notice of the Jewish current occupation of the Holy Land. Now, some have tried to argue that the Jews aren't really in control of the land. Problem with that theory is scripture makes no distinction. In Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 34, it reads, "I will bring you out from the peoples and gather you out of the countries where you are scattered, with a mighty hand, with an outstretched arm, and with fury poured out." Scripture clearly tells us that Yah was to bring his people back to their land with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Again, there was nothing spectacular nor mighty about the return to the land of the so-called Jewish people. Most people barely even noticed and related it back to scripture. The only fury that was poured out was by the rockets of men, not Yah. Ezekiel, we also find in chapter 20, verse 35, it says, "And I will bring you into the wilderness of the peoples, and there I will plead my case with you face to face." Well, obviously not so that anyone noticed it. No one recalled hearing that prior to the Jewish people taking control of the Holy Land, that they were taken into the wilderness and they heard the voice of Yah. Because Yah said, and read that scripture again, "I will bring you into the wilderness of the peoples, and there I will plead my case with you face to face." Has that happened? Not that anybody noticed. Yah did not speak to the Jewish people in the wilderness before they returned to the land. And we got another scripture in Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 41, which reads, "And I will be hallowed in you before the Gentiles." Again I ask, was this prophecy fulfilled? If it was, no one noticed. Yah, the Elohim of Israel, has not been given any honor regarding the Jewish people claiming that land as their own. The Gentiles have not given him honor. Now, as if that little faux pas wasn't bad enough, there's another glaring obstacle within Scripture to a future enslavement and return to the land of Israel.